Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to review the Watercolor Confections Pastel Dreams Palette, and I create a watercolor painting with it. I'm super excited for this video because I love testing out new materials and find out how they differ from the materials that I'm used to work with. The reason why I bought the Pastel Dreams palette in the first place was that I had a huge problem with sticking to color palettes. I discovered the palette through Saruka Tepes, sorry for butchering your name, who did a review video of it. I thought I never need this palette, but it turned out it helped me a lot so far. By the way, I will have a link to the palette and to all other materials that I used to create this artwork in the description of the video. Maybe you have experienced a similar problem before as well. You want to create a pretty watercolor piece with a bright and fresh palette. While you paint, you constantly get darker and use more color until everything has either the basic colors that are in your palette in the darkest versions like red, blue and green, or worse, everything looks like mud. It happens so often to me that I take the wrong color that doesn't fit to my painting, and then I try to balance it out with another color that is way too bright, and in the end I'm stunned to discover how much I messed up my artwork. I cannot tell you how frustrating it is, especially if you want to create a pastel-like, soft-looking illustration. I usually fight and oftentimes overcome it by forcing myself to not get darker than a color value which I previously set. I create color swatches before I start, and then I force myself to stick to that. But whenever I lose focus, when I get distracted, I will oftentimes grab the darker colors and ruin my artwork. So that strategy works 5 times out of 10 and requires a lot of discipline for me. And at some point I was so frustrated that I decided to buy this pastel palette. However, I only seem to have this problem when I create my more manga style-like illustrative pieces. Whenever I have a photo reference that I want to render realistically, I can rely on my reference picture and I don't have to think about what colors would match or fit together. So if you want to create something more realistically, you probably don't need the palette. Unless you want to recreate a photo in pastel tones, which, now when I think about it, would probably look gorgeous. Okay, let's start with the unboxing. The Pastel Dreams palette comes in a super cute little tin box inside of a cardboard container. Apparently, it's made in Korea by Prima. All the colors have super cute names, which of course is not really important, but it's a nice thing that I liked. It has 12 colors, including brown, chocolate, crimson, rose, lemonade, citrus, bumblebee, sea dream, paradise, pool party, icy sky and lilac rain. I started with brown. It reminded me of raw umber tone, a very natural brown with a yellowish tone to it. The chocolate brown I found very beautiful because it exactly looked like milk chocolate when dried. Surprisingly, both browns are quite different. Then we have crimson, which looked very promising in the pan, but when dried was a bit dull. I always have these problems with reds, by the way. They seem to be never really bright from the start and often faded when dried. I still like the color though. It is a pastel color after all, so it does what it says on the packaging. Then we have rose, which is a pink tone that I absolutely love. The next one, lemonade, is more of a flesh tone. I love both of these pink tones. Then there's an orange tone called citrus. This one is a yellowish orange, which is very bright. The next one is called bumblebee, a super bright yellow tone that stands out very strongly from the other colors. The yellow watercolor from my other palette is also super bright. Yellow pigments don't seem to have a problem with brightness compared to reds. With this pigment I need to be very careful, because it could easily cover all the other colors. Then we have sea dream and paradise. 2 pretty turquoise tones. I love turquoise and blues, so these tones were right up my alley. Those are very similar, with Sea Dream being the lighter version of them. Then there's Pool Party, a lovely, comparatively bright blue tone, and Icy Sky, a very light, more grayish blue tone. Even though these 4 colors look very similar, I found them to be a great help in my painting to stay in the pastel color range. The last color is Lilac Rain, a beautiful purple tone that I could use for adding lots of smaller accents to my painting. The consistency of all colors reminded me of the Kuretake watercolors. The Pastel Dream colors are like a crossover between gouache and watercolor because they have a slightly opaque quality and are not perfectly transparent. I would have preferred if they were like my Schminke watercolors because due to their slight opacity, it was a bit difficult to work in layers. They are not that opaque, so I could still do it. So that's just me nitpicking. Also, the pens are a tad too small for the brackets, so they slided from left to right when I touched them with a brush, and in order to fix that, I used double-sided tape to stick them onto the metal. That worked out perfectly. And now let's move on to the actual painting process. I decided to use the Watercolor Confections palette for one of my commissions. My collector wished for a painting in my manga style, a crossover between a geisha and a Chinese kitsune fox demon wearing a Belle Epoque dress and her hair adorned with pansies. So that was quite the difficult task, if you ask me. After I finished the initial drawing, I didn't want to mess up the colors under no circumstances. So while painting, I focused to think about which colors would fit best when using the palette. The wonderful thing was that the palette forced me to use way lighter colors that I would naturally mix. For the hair, for example, I would have chosen a dark red. But I couldn't. The crimson red is a rather light red, so in order to be able to add some darker hair strands, I started relatively light and then added darker shades of crimson, and later on added darker shades with brown, chocolate and lilac green. I realized that the palette doesn't have any blacks, greys or even dark blues, so whenever I wanted to mix a darker color, I was limited to the 2 brown tones. Normally, I would never choose brown to darken my colors because I always feared that my paintings look boring when I use too much brown. But in this case, I could carefully work out a balance between her red hair, the turquoise green of her dress and the light blues of her 9 tails. After having finished the portrait portion, I continued with painting in the elaborate pattern of her Belle Epoque dress. I cannot say enough how much I love the theme of this commission. I simply adore intricate jewelry and fashion patterns, so I enjoyed every second of painting this piece. However, that joy can easily be turned into disappointment if I make a couple of wrong brush strokes. So in order to realize the dress as I planned and to keep it balanced color-wise, I filled in everything with a paradise green tone, mixed with a bit of the citrus or bumblebee yellow to give it a greenish look. My collector also wished for pansies adorning her hair. That was not enough for me and I added pansies all over her wardrobe. I always tend to come back to the same flowers, roses, peonies and lilies mostly, but after having studied pansies I really fell in love with them. They are so different in color and shape and they kind of look as if they all have a mind of their own. After having completed the shadows in the fabric and the wrinkles of the dress, which serve as a base color, I continued working on the little details on her intricate jewelry around her chest. I also covered all of the outlines of my charcoal underdrawing with watercolor. I don't use any specific pens, just a tiny brush and paint. I didn't record that part though. It's not really suitable for video because I turn my drawing around all the time while almost touching it with my nose. So there's no way recording this with the camera. My collector plays in the Beijing Opera, so I looked for a beautiful Chinese name for my painting. While I was researching, I discovered that Chinese names have such beautiful meanings too. I named my artwork Yubi, which means jade emerald, and matches well the color palette of the piece. To conclude, I really love the pastels palette. I personally like when I don't have all the choices in the world when choosing colors. So a limited palette like this one was incredibly beneficial for me. And it was satisfying to not see a piece getting darker and muddier while the painting progresses. I also loved being limited with the black tones apparently. I never use brown for that purpose and being obliged to use it made me think how to find a balance for it. Oftentimes my color palettes look the same way when I do my illustrations, and to be honest, I hate that, even though the pieces are looking good. I have so many colors in my palette, so why am I ending up with the same color choices every time I create a new painting? Really frustrating. So my final conclusion is that I love the pastel palette. Any other limited palette would be probably great too. And since I've also heard that there are liquid pastel colors available, I definitely need to try them out in future. So, speaking of learning something new and being satisfied with your work, if you are not satisfied but instead constantly frustrated because you don't know any good techniques for watercolors, then you should definitely check out my huge collection of painting lessons on Patreon. Join me on Patreon and get access to over 60 painting videos and tutorials about watercolors, oils, color pencils and mixed media techniques. Depending on which reward tier you would like to join, you will receive beautiful art gifts from me every month, embellished fine art prints, original watercolor illustrations and even your own custom oil painting. You can also join my monthly painting live stream in which I answer all your questions. The video has not ended yet. I really love trying out these new painting supplies and sharing my feedback with you. A couple of months ago, my friend Tracy gifted me this fantastic, gigantic pile of art supplies, including the Etcher bag and the Etcher field bag, the Vivida watercolor sheets, Wanderlust watercolors, neon color wax pastels, glitter watercolors, a set of brushes and a lot more stuff. My plan is to slowly make a review of each of these pieces individually and share my experience with you. I don't really have a lot of time, so that can probably take a year or more until I can go through all of them, but I'm very excited to try them out. By the way, my friend Tracy, beside of being the sweetest person ever, also is an incredibly talented individual. She is an artist and writer, she has published several novels already, exhibits in galleries worldwide, and you should 100% check her out. I will include links to her website and books in the video description for you. I hope you found this video helpful and worth your time. And if you did, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. And I see you in the next one. Bye!